But effectively, what we've now started to see is that those drugs have gone from people helping people with their type 2 diabetes, going from that to saying, okay, well, actually, these drugs now have been analyzed because they've been in market for a long time, realizing that they are cardioprotective. So they help at the metabolic level to be able to reduce stress on the cardiovascular system, which obviously then enables neuroprotection. So there's also very strong evidence to suggest that these drugs help with the prevention of cognitive impairment and its progression. So you've just got to look at the share price of Novo Nordisk when they hit the market and people went nuts over GLP-1 agonists. It was a long journey to get there. And of course, as many know, they became the most valuable company in Europe at a point. That's all dropped away because we've seen Mounjaro and other products, Eli Lilly, Novartis coming into the space, bringing other therapeutics into that category, which now means that really the healthcare system is already deploying, whether it's public or private, really aging disease management therapies that have now gone into aging disease prevention. And, I know, having spoken with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, as we do, that they are now switching their therapeutic focus across the disease areas that they're comfortable in working with into prevention, because they can see that there's a commercial benefit in doing so. And obviously, when people kind of say, like, big pharma just makes its money out of diseases, it's never going to change its attitude, I can absolutely empirically say that that's not the case. They see a therapeutic pathway to prevention, and they can see the commercial pathway to success. And that's very much happening.
Hello, Phil. You are the founder and CEO at Longevity.Technology, which is the #1 destination for news and data for the growing longevity market. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Richard, it's a real pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So, Phil, could you give us some background to the starting of Longevity.Technology? You were quite early as one of the news areas news sites for longevity. So what got you into the market in the first place?
Well, I guess, Richard, I was looking for a new market to apply my skills to. I mean, I've spent my whole career as a professional marketer, and really I was deciding on what the rest of my life would look like. I'd spent a lot of time as a management consultant, working with both disruptive technologies from large corporates as well as disruptive technologies and markets for startups. And I guess really looking at the markets I've been in, one of those that I missed was Fintech, and I was very annoyed about that. So I thought, well, what is the new and emerging sector that is exciting, would add some value back to humanity, and where I should put my efforts. And it was on a bike ride between Trondheim and Oslo, where I was doing a 24-hour race. And it was on the train from Oslo to Trondheim that I read an article in the Financial Times about a company called Juvenescence. They just raised 50 million in their Series A. And it was the first time I'd heard the term anti-aging and longevity. And at that time, there wasn't really a nomenclature for the industry. So I decided to reserve quite a few variables of the domain name, but settled on Longevity.Technology while investigating the sector. And I realized that the industry was pretty messy. There was a lot of interesting science happening, but it was being interpreted by people in all sorts of ways. People were talking about immortality, other people were talking about Healthspan. And I decided that what I would do is I'd hire some journalists and a researcher. So I had members of a small team. We spent 9 months working in stealth mode, building Longevity.Technology. And we launched in September 2019. And I wouldn't say we were looking in the rearview mirror as the first mover. There were other people before us, but I don't think the industry was ready then. And really looking at the industry as it is now since 2019's launch, of course, it's familiar to many people now. And obviously the theme is picking up at all levels of society, from global organizations, like the World Health Organization, all the way through to individual investors that are putting money into longevity startups. So it's really happening now. And really what we're looking to do is to consolidate our position in the market as the number one, but also we're going to be doubling down. We're using our data to really expand our outreach and our content over the coming years. So it's a very exciting time. Started back in 2019, and I think this is the rest of my career set now.
So what would you say is the mission of Longevity.Technology?
Well, our mission has been really to consolidate the industry so it's identifiable for people, whether they are investors, which is very, very important to the sector, policymakers, but also the individual companies and scientists and innovators in the space that are really looking to share their message out to the marketplace. So we do that. We've done a good job of pulling that together. We have a very mixed readership, and sometimes that's a blessing and a curse, right? So we have many millions of visitors every year, but that's a mixture of people from investors, family offices, all the way through to individuals that are looking to understand what sort of hacks they should be looking for in their own longevity journeys. So it's very interesting, our readership mix. Our focus going forward with our new development of data and content is going to be highly targeted at investors. The investor marketplace is, as I would say, is very much open now for business in relation to longevity. It's still complex for people to understand. And really our job going forward is going to be really boosting the investment activities that comes into the space. There was, our data has clearly identified that investment is going up. It over doubled between 23 and 2024. 2024, it hit 8.43 billion, which is great, but it's nowhere near enough to come back to the size of the problem. The size of the problem is huge. And I think governments are starting to realize this. And I'm sure we'll talk about GLP-1 agonists at some point in our conversation today. I think as a marketer, and I've been in clean tech before clean tech really was a market. I've been in other industries. I suppose even going back to my .com experience, where you see these momentums behind what happens globally, and I'm very confident now that this industry is going to flourish and grow very quickly.
So, thinking about the market as it is now, I mean, how do you make sense of it? How do you see the different players? Do you divide them up into different areas, different groups? I mean, how do you think about the market?
Well, I think about the market in two ways, and I should explain that the first version of the industry, Longevity 1.0, is the industry that we're experiencing now. So we know about everything from wearables, consumer diagnostics, and so forth, and people biohacking their longevity, and likewise longevity clinics that are all around the world and growing. That is an industry that's here right now, and companies are forming, companies are making revenue, and that is the industry that we're seeing now, where people are becoming much more aware about the difference between the extent of their lifespan and the extent of their health span. And that message is very clear now to many people, not everybody, but many people. So that's longevity industry 1.0. So Longevity 2.0 is the next phase of the industry's growth, which is where we're going to see the very exciting biotech companies that are working on therapies that are going to do a number of things to help humanity. So the first is that they are going to manage diseases, right? So we analyze in our industry analysis companies that are working on management of aging diseases. Now, that's a very important point I should clearly differentiate, because that effectively is the healthcare industry as it is now. So people get sick, drugs are developed to manage that disease, whatever it may be, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and so on. And that is really the industry crossover between traditional healthcare and the move for our industry to move to the next level, which is prevention. So the companies in the biotech space that are working on the hallmarks of aging, the therapeutic pathways of aging, are working in both fixing aging diseases or managing those aging diseases, but also able with their intellectual property to move towards preventing those diseases. So we move to prevention, then we move to reversal, and the concept of reversing a disease is very much within our reach. There are some very exciting companies working in this space, and those are the biotech companies that I would consider are the very near term. And what I've actually laid out for you is something else I'll talk about in a moment, which is the 10 levels of longevity that we've got as our very solid thesis of analyzing the industry. But I've just really described to you what I consider to be longevity 2.0. Longevity 3.0 is really where we're starting to look at not only biological therapeutics, but we're also looking at medical devices as well as transplants and so forth, to be able to help people to live a lot longer. And this is really where you start to see things like brain-computer interfacing and virtual systems to be able to help augment humanity. And that's really longevity 3.0, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the space needs to be kind of really identified across those three pillars, because people get confused. And I'll tell you about our 10 levels of longevity when you think it's right in our conversation today. But really what we're seeing is that there's a now industry, there's a next industry, and there's a future industry, which I define as 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Okay. I mean, longevity 3.0 sounds very interesting. But I mean, did you have any idea for a time scale for 1, 2, and 3? Well, 1 is now, right? But for 2 and 3. I mean, do you have any idea for when they might be happening?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say that 2.0, when we start to see really these therapeutics that are working on disease prevention, you could argue that that industry is already manifest in the GLP-1 agonists or the weight loss drugs that we're seeing all around the world, right? So you could say that it's here already. But in terms of the pipeline of new and exciting therapeutics coming through, I'm very confident that we will see them within market within 5 years' time. Not all of them. Obviously, they've still got to get through the final stages of their clinical trials and to reach approval. And obviously, once they've reached approval, they need to get endorsement from health systems to be able to fund them. But we are going to see these within 5 years. And within 10 years, we'll see multiples of them. So I would say, to answer your question, easily within 5, but definitely within 10.
And 2.0 was prevention. Did you include like reversal in 2.0?
Yes, I do.
You do.
Yeah. So I would say that we would see reversal at an organ level, but not at a systemic level. So I would say that systemic rejuvenation, which could be anything from senolytic therapies to mitochondrial transplant to systemic partial cellular reprogramming, they're going to be a way off. And I think we'll start to see those within 10 years. And as I'm 58 and I'm approaching 60, I want them to be around in 10 years' time. So when I hit my stride in my 70s, there will be therapeutics in the marketplace that can actually reverse the progression of my age. And then obviously we could be having conversations about longevity escape velocity and what that means for humanity.
So do you think it's helpful to talk about age reversal at the moment? Since, I mean, this is kind of a side thing, but there's no definition of what it means to be a particular biological age. I mean, we have various definitions, but they don't all agree.
Yep.
So when we say we're reversing age, it's so easy for people who are perhaps skeptical to say, well, you can't actually show that. You can't prove it. So is it helpful to talk about age reversal?
Well, so first of all, you're talking about a valid industry accepted biomarker or panel of biomarkers that can demonstrate that biological age is reversing. And the industry is very, very aware of that, right? So I'm sure maybe you and many of your viewers and listeners will have done a biological age test, and they may be delighted with the results of that. They may be disappointed with the results of that. I think the consumer diagnostic space is something that is setting the wheels in motion for people to start considering the difference between biological and chronological age. But as we know, you do three different tests and you're going to get three different answers. So there is a distinct lack of industry consensus about the standardization of age. So there's the Biomarkers of Aging Consortium, which is a really wonderful organization. They're on their third year of their conference now. And what they're doing is a really, really good job of bringing together all of the best minds in the industry so that we can actually establish, as I say, a biomarker test or a panel of tests that reflect very accurately the progression of age within an individual and whether it's they're aging faster or aging slower. And that's very important for industry consensus, so that obviously we all have a position where there's a standardized test that everything can be measured against. But it's also very important that that is accepted by a lot of other communities. So first of all, the clinical community. There's a growth, as we talked about, in longevity clinics, but there, compared to the overall healthcare systems, there's a distinct lack of knowledge about these biomarkers in the wider clinical community. But as we know, aging is the key driver of chronic disease, and if we can manage and identify age progression at a clinical level, at a population level, and the tests are agreed and endorsed by the clinical community, then that's a really big milestone to hit, and that's going to be quite a hard one to do. There's a lot of lobbying and activity that will be required to do that, but of course, that's a very interesting opportunity for the whole industry to go on an education drive to be able to make that happen. But likewise, that needs to be accepted by healthcare systems to run blood panels and actually establish an age score for populations to be able to help them manage their diseases. And interestingly, in the UK, the NHS is now using AI across 51 million health records to apply that knowledge to actually help people with age prevention already. And that's with existing technology. But from a biotech perspective, all those companies that are looking to develop therapeutics that can potentially roll back age and the progression of age, they need a surrogate biomarker that they can work to so that their clinical trials can actually demonstrate in parallel with their disease focus that their clinical trial will have to be working on, that they can also be in a position where they can reverse age. So long answer to your question, it's a very important factor for the industry. The industry is taking it very seriously, and we will get to a point where there is a standardization of aging biomarkers. And you could say that it's nearly there, but I think that the journey for the industry is to then take that knowledge and expand it, into other industries and other policy-making structures around the world to be able to instantiate that more deeply into people's thinking.
That would be good, yes, to have a standardized number. So I think it would be good to think about these 10 levels of longevity as they exist so this is in Longevity 1.0. So this is as the market exists currently. Is that correct?
Correct. So the first four levels for Longevity 1.0 are lifestyle management, with wearables, apps, and so on to be able to understand your heart rate variability, your calorie intake, your sleep, all of those things. And we all know that's an industry that's here right now. Level 2 is consumer diagnostics. We've already talked about that, but obviously there are multiple tests available. They're getting higher fidelity on the blood draws that they're taking to give more accurate information to their customers. Level 3 is longevity biohacking, which is what a lot of people do at an individual level, but we can see now that biohacking as an industry is now moving much more towards longevity biohacking. And this is, of course, everything from red light therapy, cryotherapy, to other interventions that you can use to use the lifestyle management and diagnostics to optimize what it is that you're doing. And then level 4 is the growing longevity clinics marketplace, which again, has still got work to do in terms of standardization of protocols and training of clinicians, but we can see that there's industry momentum there now to make that happen. So you've got those first four levels fit very firmly into the 1.0 category of longevity.
Actually, I saw that there was a paper that I think you reported on, or Longevity.Technology reported on, a white paper that came out like 2 days ago from the IIOL that was talking about exactly this, like standardization of longevity clinic biomarkers and so on.
Correct. Yeah. And the industry knows that it needs to do that, right? Because I've been to three longevity clinics and they've all identified things that they consider that need attention, but none of them found the same thing. So, of course, that demonstrates a benefit of a longevity clinic. I've been advised on, cardiovascular issues, even mental health issues. But of course, they were different depending on which clinic I went to and which tests they ran. So we want to get to a point where people like myself can benefit from preventative knowledge that they can apply to their everyday lives. But of course, when you go to a clinic in Thailand or Washington or whatever it may be, you want to be in a position where you get effectively the same diagnostics and the same client management or patient management so that becomes standardized around the world. And there's momentum behind doing that. And it will be within a year that we start to see that.
That would be good because one thing is that longevity clinics tend to be expensive, and hopefully, when we have more standardization, then there could be it could be cheaper or more.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, longevity clinics know that too, right? So there's only a certain amount of 1% clients out there, right? So they're slugging it out, trying to get the high net worth individuals to come in their clinics. They're realizing that there's a volume and value equation, as there is in any market, to the work that they do. So we're seeing this next wave of price reduction, scalability using AI, that obviously more clinics will realize that they can adopt and they can start to get higher volume clients coming through, at a lower price point. And of course, what we really want is the trickle down effect of all of that into national healthcare systems. That means that they're available for everybody, whether you're a patient in the UK where you're under the NHS, where of course you get your effectively your services for free, even though you pay insurance for that through your national insurance contributions through wages. But likewise, healthcare insurers that obviously, all of their configuration at the moment is towards disease management and very little of it is towards disease prevention. So if we can get to the point where all of this great work that's happening in clinics at the moment can really start to scale across multiple millions of recipients, then that's no bad thing. And that will happen over time.
So at the moment, are you saying that these longevity clinics are essentially like a doctor or a group of doctors who have come out of the normal system and said, we're going to set up a longevity clinic, and then they manage that in that way, right? It's not within the existing healthcare system per se.
Correct, but there are some exceptions to that. So you've got Mayo Clinic in the States, Sheba Hospital in Israel, and the National University of Singapore that are all running programs that are available to the general public. And they're the tip of the spear. There'll be others that will do that going forwards too. And even in the UK, for example, there's a program open. The target is 5 million users, 5 million UK citizens, where you get a much deeper. You go for a blood test, you get a much deeper analysis of your health and the trajectory of your health with a view to prevention. So we're seeing everything happening at once at different scales, but I do believe that the private longevity clinics and the physicians that are part of that, many of whom still work hybrid across private as well as public, we can see that knowledge is going to start expanding into public systems in the future.
So that was 1 to 4 of your 10. Is now a good time to talk about the others? They're still part of Longevity 1.0, right?
Correct. Yeah. So happy to jump into Longevity 2.0, right?
Okay.
So 2.0 is really an expansion of aging disease management. It's using all of the great biotech work that's happening at the moment to improve those drugs that help us manage aging diseases. For example, Alzheimer's. Obviously, there is a second wave of companies that are now releasing products that can at least slow down the progression of Alzheimer's. And those are companies that will obviously be in a position where they will use that knowledge from their level 5, which is aging disease management, to move to level 6, which is aging disease prevention. And, we have got a big database that we're building at the moment, which identifies mechanisms of action, aging pathways, target modalities for lots of level 5 companies that can then be applied to prevention at level 6 and maybe even level 7, which is actually age reversal at an organ level. So we call level 7 targeted age reversal. So we're seeing companies now, for example, Life Biosciences, they're going into phase 2 trials in early 2026 to use partial cellular reprogramming to rewind eye disease, which is very exciting. And then you can see that those companies and those technologies that are looking at this reversal process, they will have to work at an organ-specific level at the moment. But of course, then they could move to the next phase, which is moving, as we talked about, into the 3.0 categories, which is level 8, which is actually systemic reversal. So you can apply those technologies not to targeted cells within an organ, but to cells across the whole body. And as I mentioned earlier, we can see that senolytic therapies will be part of that. Mitochondrial transplant and rejuvenation will be part of that. But likewise, these companies, and they're very well funded, some of these companies like Altos Labs, who are working on partial cellular reprogramming, we could see that there'll be a progression of that technology over a period of time where you can rewind the cellular age of every cell within the body, but each cell basically keeps its cellular identity. And that's when you've got that systemic reversal process, which we would consider to be the point where you're in this category of 3.0. Level 9 is a bit of a kind of let's call it a big red button, which is maintaining the organism while these therapeutics are coming through. So this is everything from xenotransplantation, which is having bioidentical organs grown within a pig that can be transplanted into you. Likewise, 3D bioprinting of organs, or any way in which you can ensure that the body remains alive. Okay. And we're seeing really at the moment that there are some very interesting approaches on this. There's the likes of organ replacement. There's even whole body replacement. So there are companies that are working at the moment on body cloning, right? So that's pretty extreme, very, very rare, but there's some very interesting things happening in that space. And then level 10 is really moving into the position of being able to preserve the body and consciousness at a very, very extended level, which could be everything from biostasis, where you put yourself into a biostasis state while you're waiting for these therapeutics to come through, or maybe even brain-computer interfaces that with the new technologies that are available, specifically in quantum as well, where you may be able to get to a position where you can upload your brain into the cloud and maybe exist even without a body. So talked to a very interesting company yesterday that is a level 9 and level 10 company that is using its technology now just to improve the preservation of existing organs for transplant, and using that technology to be able to consider how that can be applied from biostasis into effectively a live human. But they're also in a position where they're talking very practically now about spinal cord transplant, which we're starting to see happening around the world, albeit on a small scale, which then means that you can maybe go into the future of body or head transplantation. So, it sounds very strange to a lot of people, and I'm very selective about the conversations I have about these things, because this is why we stratified across these 10 levels within the industry. So investors can identify which longevity level they're comfortable in investing in, and companies can identify themselves at whichever longevity level they are. So you get that clarity and correlation between investors and the marketplace, so that you're not conflating this very complex industry when people kind of go, well, that's just wacko, I'm not part of all of that. You talk about head transplants, Phil, but reality is that is the extreme end of the industry. Is 10, 15 years away. It's longevity 3.0. So really, we see our mission as being able to help people understand their level of interest and engagement in the industry, so that we can keep people in their lanes and the industry will grow.
That was really interesting. But just going back to aging disease management and aging disease prevention. See, Alzheimer's starts like decades before before you see anything, right? So the prevention is, it's not just technically different. It's just the whole economics of how you would do the prevention is different. Do you see it's the same companies that are looking at management are now trying to do prevention, or is it a new set of companies doing the prevention?
It's both. So when you look at what happened with the weight loss drugs, right? So the GLP-1s. Now, they have been, they've taken a long time to be developed. In fact, we looked at the scientific pathway, and it took 57 years for GLP-1s to go from discovery to market, which is a very long time. Now, those timescales are gone now. We're going to see a lot of acceleration with AI and so forth to be able to reduce those timescales. But effectively, what we've now started to see is that those drugs have gone from people helping people with their type 2 diabetes, going from that to saying, okay, well, actually, these drugs now have been analyzed because they've been in market for a long time, realizing that they are cardioprotective. So they help at the metabolic level to be able to reduce stress on the cardiovascular system, which obviously then enables neuroprotection. So there's also very strong evidence to suggest that these drugs help with the prevention of cognitive impairment and its progression. So you just got to look at the share price of Novo Nordisk when they hit the market and people went nuts over GLP-1 agonists. It was a long journey to get there. And of course, as many know, they became the most valuable company in Europe at a point. That's all dropped away because we've seen Mounjaro and other products, Eli Lilly, Novartis coming into the space, bringing other therapeutics into that category, which now means that really the healthcare system is already deploying, whether it's public or private, really aging disease management therapies that have now gone into aging disease prevention. And, I know, having spoken with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, as we do, that they are now switching their therapeutic focus across the disease areas that they're comfortable in working with into prevention, because they can see that there's a commercial benefit in doing so. And obviously, when people kind of say, like, big pharma just makes its money out of diseases, it's never going to change its attitude. I can absolutely empirically say that that's not the case. They see a therapeutic pathway to prevention, and they can see the commercial pathway to success. And that's very much happening. And the exciting thing is that we've started to see licensing between longevity biotech companies that are working on these therapeutic pathways now signing, multi-million-dollar licensing deals with big pharma, because they're applying their knowledge and technology to the drugs that are already available in market by those pharmaceutical companies to combine those therapeutics to move into this preventative state. And that is very, very exciting. And that really is going to be the proof point that is going to start scaling up much more quickly as these therapeutics go through their phase 2A to phase 2B status. So they're obviously proving efficacy as well as safety in a larger patient population, but they need the financial firepower of these pharma companies to be able to progress to phase 3, to obviously extend those studies into a much larger population, to then prove that they can actually work, and then they get authorized as a therapeutic. And then that relationship between the biotech that's done the innovation and the pharma company that's got the market clout, whether it's footprint or financial investment, they then can move those drugs and therapies into market. And as I say, to come back to your point earlier, how long do you expect that to be? I'm very confident that's going to be within 5 years. And the data work that we're doing at the moment will be able to give a very empirical answer to that question. I don't have the data yet. We're working on building all of that out. But my key analysis is to understand how many companies are in that phase 2A to phase 2B slot, and what is their trajectory from going from phase 2 to market. And that's where we're bringing all of that data together, really within a tool that is going to be an M&A and investment tool specifically focused on longevity biotech.
So moving on, so we talked about investment a bit. So moving on to investment. So we have had a guest who said, like he couldn't get any investment. It's like he thought the investment market was like dead at the moment. But you said that there's a lot of money coming in. So what do you see? How do you see the current investment market for longevity?
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, there are some data points, and we produce an annual report. We've published that report a little while ago now. It's available on our website. All you need to do is click on the research button, and then you'll get to our research. Interestingly, there's a research document there about longevity clinics that your readers and listeners might be interested in. But as I say, the investment in the space hit 8.26 billion in 2024, which is a big leap from 3.76 billion in 2023. But the reality is that the space actually attracted more investment in 2021, as did every other industry, because the investment environment was very different in 2021, and it's changed considerably for all sectors since that time. So, whether you're a biotech or you're a clean tech or whatever type of company, obviously a lot of people are moving into different investment themes. So there's a lot of work to be done. The interesting data points that we've also got is that even though there was more capital coming into the space, there were actually fewer transactions. So that means that the quantum is bigger on the deal size, but that's over a smaller footprint of companies. So what we've actually seen is that there is more investment going into later stage companies, which is actually is a good thing and a bad thing. So the good news for that is that investors are investing bigger checks into later stage companies because those companies are producing much stronger clinical evidence to be able to support those therapies going through. So that's great. The problem is in those mid-cap companies, those companies that are perhaps pre-IND filing or they're still in their phase 1 trials, they're the ones that are struggling for capital at the moment. So we are seeing that trend in the marketplace. We are going to be using our data to a very large degree to be able to identify those companies that are at that tricky mid-stage, but have got very solid science, strong IP, and a strong trajectory for exits. We are actually analyzing that data in our system, and we will be working with funds and potentially creating our own funding structure to be able to participate more actively and fill that gap in the middle, because that's where the opportunity lies. If you make the right bets, those are the companies that are going to be attracting that later stage finance going down the line.
Where do you see the money coming from? Is it like these funds like Juvenescence or high net worth individuals, governments, or like foundations like Evolution?
Well, it's a mixture of all of those. So you do have a number of companies that are on public markets. So you've got investment banking, you've got traditional investors, you've got public stock investors that are supporting those companies, and that's great. Obviously, there's a good news and bad news by being publicly quoted, but that's another discussion. So we're seeing everybody participating in the space, whether it's angel investors. Obviously, they come in earlier. They obviously put in smaller checks, but they're active. VC investors, well, there are about 30 VC funds that are purely dedicated to the longevity theme. But again, they will be toggling between 1.0 and 2.0 companies. Some might be more comfortable with consumer products. Some will be more comfortable with biotechs. We obviously want more dedicated longevity focused funds. And I hear about, them coming into the marketplace, but we need more of those. But of course, you've got traditional biotech investors that, like the pharma companies, are going, okay, well, actually, we need to move our targets over into prevention. And again, they are taking their disease management thesis now over into disease prevention. And of course, sitting behind those venture capital funds are a combination of investors. You've got family offices that obviously invest in funds as LPs. That's really their let's call it their safer route, because obviously they don't have the intrinsic knowledge on the science, and they entrust their money to VCs. So we see a lot of activity and interest from family offices in the space as an investment theme, but also as a participation in therapeutic areas that their family, whether it's the patriarchs and matriarchs of those family or all of their offspring, can benefit from those going forward in the future. So we're seeing a really strong mix of what's happening. We ran some analysis, and actually, there were the two top investors really surprised us. One was the National Institutes of Health in the USA. So they're one of the top investors into longevity biotechs. And there was also a top 10 pharma that was in there investing too. So it's a very spread mix. Of course, it's sporadic because we've addressed that problem earlier, that people still find the space confusing. But I can see now that with our role as we have in the industry, really helping clarify, the investment theme for everybody, that's going to grow because we're seeing it happening. So a long answer to your question, but the answer to that question is everybody, but we need more of them.
Yes, I'm sure. So what technologies? So we talked about GLP-1 as the GLP-1 agonists as one of the technologies for prevention that's kind of already here. But what other technologies do you see would be coming in the near future that will be available at scale?
Okay, so there's a number of answers to this. So let's deal with the ones that are happening right now. So sarcopenia, muscle wastage as you get old. We lose 2% of our body muscle mass every year after the age of 50. So there are a lot of companies that have been working on sarcopenia as a therapeutic focus. We're now seeing those companies working with the GLP-1 agonist companies to develop the next phase of those drugs. So they address the muscle maintenance issue associated with those therapeutics, which is great. So we're going to see those coming into market much quicker. Of course, there are the derivatives of existing drugs. So GLP-1s again, we're seeing people microdosing GLP-1s. So those are existing drugs available now, privately as well as publicly. But likewise, there's the old favorites, right? So you've got metformin and rapamycin. There are companies that are taking those existing therapeutics that are proven and safe, but they're combining those with other molecules to be able to develop enhanced versions of those products. Now, again, they will still need to go through the therapeutic pathway to prove safety and efficacy, but they're based on a baseline of a drug that's already in market, which is really exciting. So those are the companies that are here and now, and the proximity to actual market products are either here or they're very close. I'm particularly excited about senescence-focused therapeutics, which are companies that are either preventing senescence from happening in the first place, or they're clearing that cell debris, those zombie cells, out of the system. Companies in the longevity space are moving into later stages of clinical development, which is great. We're going to see some of those coming into the market fairly soon. And as I've already mentioned to you, partial cellular reprogramming is still very experimental, but there are a number of companies now that are moving into that mid-stage clinical pipeline development where we can see the concept of reversing age. So effectively, those four are the ones that I am most excited about because of their proximity to market. And then everything else we talked about will be coming, but it won't be as quick.
I was thinking of the more kind of radical, although I would have put partial reprogramming in the radical, but
Semi-radical.
Semi-radical. I mean, it is getting closer, so it's definitely there. Yeah, I mean, if we were thinking of the longer term technologies, which one do you see is best positioned to move forward? So, although we have to remove partial reprogramming from that list because
Well, I don't think we can because, as I mentioned earlier, partial reprogramming at a individual cell level is the focus of what's happening at the moment, to be specifically working on cells that are really aligned specifically to an organ. There's a company called Shift Bioscience that just made an announcement recently that they can use their technology applied to more than one cell. So effectively what it's doing is it's having an off-target benefit as well, which is it's only two cells, right? But two categories of cells, but it's demonstrating that ability to apply partial cellular reprogramming to more than one particular cell type. So a long way to go. And of course, the stepping stones to success will be that will happen at an organ level specifically, but I don't think we can really put partial cellular reprogramming out of the context of systemic age reversal. Likewise, as I mentioned to you before, we've got that concept of mitochondrial transplantation, where effectively you're re-energizing all of the cells in the body. There are companies that are moving into clinical stage now, so they're moving into phase 1 studies. That's very exciting. One of the issues with that is that keeping them in the system after a period of time, because there's a washout cycle with that. So there's a long way to go for all of these therapeutics. They're not over-promising, but there is potential there for that systemic age reversal, which I would say is is a very exciting opportunity for the whole industry. But that's, to me, that's 10 to 15 years away.
Do you see a change in the regulatory environment that the government will now start, like using aging biomarkers that we talked about earlier, and say, well, if you can reverse this, then we'll give you approval?
Definitely, because every developed society has got the same problem with the birth rates. So they've got increasingly aging societies. They have the burden, obviously, of social care, which we're all very familiar with, but they have a lot of people that are at our age that they want to keep as productive and as healthy as they possibly can for as long as possible. So I think there is a top-down, government-led approach to thinking about what can be done at a population scale to keep their population healthy and productive, and earning taxes more than anything else is very important. And we've already seen that in America, Montana as a state has now started to put the wheels in motion for their concept of right to try, which was originally only available to people that were in end of life critical state, where they could try drugs that were not in market but were proven to be safe and had indications of therapeutic success, which are these companies that are at phase 2A and phase 2B and phase 3 trials. So Montana is now setting a law where citizens of that state can actually access the right to try laws, which is very, very interesting, because it means that they're bringing down the barriers to accessing more experimental therapeutics. Now, again, the argument will be, well, of course, that will be for people that can afford it. And of course, those companies that are deploying those therapeutics should be really conducting those therapeutics deployment in a trial-controlled environment, so that they are building clinical evidence to help them with their approval pathway. But yeah, I can absolutely see that governments around the world are really changing their focus. And it was only really, in the publications that we've run this week, there's a big momentum from an institute in Germany to start moving into categorizing aging as a disease. I don't believe that's necessary, but that's a whole other conversation. And the World Health Authority is very much part of this as well. And so aging as a category is now something that people are looking at very, very actively from a policy development perspective. And we're going to see more movements on that. I mean, I can remember when I first heard about the GLP-1s being approved in the UK, I thought that would be for thousands of patients, but actually it was for millions of patients. And it was quite surprising to me that the government made that decision, but brilliant.
So there is the concept of longevity escape velocity, right? So the idea that you can stay fit enough or healthy enough to live forever, right? So what are your thoughts on longevity escape velocity? Do you have any idea how soon? And do you know what do you think it would look like?
I think there's a pathway to that. I think the first thing is that we will look in the rearview mirror, and we will look at average median life age across global populations. And in the same way that the US data shows that the US has now reached peak obesity and it's in decline, which is a combination of gym membership as much as it is weight loss drugs, I can see that we will start to see median life expectancy going up. And that'll happen over a period of 10 to 20 years. And within that window of 20 years, there will be these therapeutics that can work at a systemic age reversal level. And of course, it will probably be available to people that can afford it in the first instance. But then we'll start to see that actually life expectancy and the expectancy of extended health span will really start to permeate through to the data. And I think that will be a rearview mirror thing. I think there'll be a certain point that we will realize that people are really actively living into their 120s with a period of morbidity that may be, compressed into a couple of years at the end of their life. And, if I'm able as a 58-year-old to benefit from that, so I can live to 120 and enjoy playing sports and living my life and enjoying my family, then brilliant. I'm on my way as an individual, as an N of one, to contributing to the concept of humanity achieving longevity escape velocity. Combine that with the progression of quantum computing and AI, the concepts of humans living off planet, all of the exciting acceleration of complementary technologies. I can see that there'll be a point, definitely within 50 years, but whether it's in my lifetime or not, that we humans will achieve longevity escape velocity. It's just a matter of time. And if anybody tells you they know exactly when it is, I think that they're being brutally optimistic.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, with both things, that A, we'll only know once we look in the rearview mirror, and B, it's just a matter of time, right? I mean,
Yeah, I
it's going
mean,
to happen.
we're seeing science fiction happening in our everyday lives, right? What was the concept of um, changing gender, the concept of living over 70 in health. I mean, all of those things have changed, and it's just going to accelerate. But I think I want to be part of it, right? I want to be in a position where I can see the world embrace all of these technologies and see humans traveling around the universe. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's within reach of humanity. The tough question to answer is when.
Are you following the XPrize? Do you see the XPrize making any difference?
Yeah, well, I'm actually on the judging panel of the XPrize, so I've had the benefit of seeing and reviewing all of the submissions for XPrize, and being on the judging panel that shortlisted the 40 companies that are categorized currently as semi-finalists. So XPrize is brilliant, right? So XPrize has got the ability to accelerate some of the very interesting approaches that these companies are taking. And if you look at the XPrize semi-finalists, as well as those that are still able to apply for XPrize in its next phase, there are some very, very interesting approaches there. Some of them are more traditional. Some of them are the technologies that we've talked about today. Some of them are not scientifically restricted. Some of them are all about developing community and mental well-being and integrating all of those available therapeutics into a lifestyle. So it's not just the pure high tech that has attracted some of the award money. But yeah, I see XPrize as really being a phenomenal accelerator for the space. And as $110 million is not small change. Obviously, deployed across a lot of companies means that, of course, they don't get a lot of money to really accelerate them to the point where they can be in market. But the judging process will mean that from those semi-finalists, there'll be some finalists that will be some very, very standout companies that will have a big price pot to be able to benefit from to accelerate those technologies. So I can only see XPrize as being a wonderful thing.
When is the finalists kind of decided? How many finalists will there be, and when are they decided?
I should be able to answer that question with absolute authority, but I think it's 18 months, and I think the finalists will be 3 companies. But you can just check out the XPrize website to get that empirically.
Okay. So it's 18 months from now, or 18 months from when the final semi-finalists were decided?
18 months from the awards ceremony, which took place in New York last month. So that's when the clock started ticking on the 18-month program.
So about 18 months. Okay, that will be really exciting to see what happens there. Yes. Okay, so if people want to keep up with longevity and see what's going on, where do they go?
Well, it's very simple. It's www.longevity.technology. So that's our daily website, which is updated. You can follow us on social channels at Longevity Tech. And yeah, if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get news updates in your inbox every day.
Yes, I'm getting them. They're very interesting. I saw the Shift Biotech was in there that like 2 days ago, and they are really interesting. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes. Okay, Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been great talking to you.
Well, thank you, Richard. I've enjoyed it, and I hope that your viewers and readers found it interesting. And of course, if they want to find out more about the 10 levels and so on, they can just go to our website and dig in as much as they like.
Thank you. I will put all of those links into the description.